Hello, and welcome to Life with God, a podcast where we explore key ideas in God through conversations with students and expert guests. In Season 4, we study the concept of beauty, and our guest in Episode 2 is Anthony Bosman, Associate Professor of Mathematics at Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan. We're also joined by Eric Appler, Ingrid Dumitrescu, and Marius Jensen. Before the discussion, we will spend 5 minutes learning a few things about our guest.
What are some of your cherished childhood memories?
I really liked school as a kid. So even before I was old enough to go to school, I went with my sister. And after school, I remember I would watch, I think my mom volunteered at the school, so I'd stay in school after class. And I would watch episodes of the Magic School Bus, which I just thought was the best show ever. I still think it is. I think science education in America would be far greater if we had more people watching the Magic School Bus.
Do you have a favorite number? And if yes, which number is it?
Oh, that's a really good question. Probably pi. So there's just a lot about pi. So pi is 3.141592653589793384626433882795. It keeps going for a while, forever. And there's a number of mysterious properties about it, and it shows up in really some surprising places. So that's a good one.
What is your favorite pastime currently?
When weather permits, so I live where it snows, so this isn't something I do too much in the winter, but come spring and summer, I really enjoy kayaking or just year-round hiking, these kinds of things.
What do you like the most about yourself?
I like people. So I tend to get pretty excited when I meet people and I get to know them, and I like that I like other people.
Can you share a recent adventure?
Yeah, I suppose with coming out of a pandemic, there's perhaps less travel than I might enjoy. I did a road trip some time ago from Michigan to Florida, so across the states, with my dog. So it was me and my dog driving down the road, and it was pretty good. When you have a dog, you're incentivized to find places to stop along the trip and go on hikes. And so found some various places along the way I wouldn't have stopped at otherwise. Perhaps it got quite adventurous when we jumped out the window and there was quite a bit of panic. But that was a fun trip.
Has mathematics helped you to understand God?
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll get into that more today. But yes, I won't try and unpack that now because this is huge. So let me just say yes, absolutely.
When did you first start to love mathematics?
Yeah, so my mom tells a story that I went to school as a young child with my sister, and because I was quite young, I was quite shy, right? So maybe I was 3 and my sister was 5, and so I was sitting in the classroom, and so I wouldn't talk. But one day the teacher put a math problem on the board, and this is not advanced mathematics, this is probably like addition or something, but I answered it. And it was the first time I like spoke up, I guess, publicly in the classroom, and one of the other kids goes, "He speaks." and then he says, "And he's right." And so that's kind of my first memory connected with mathematics, or at least the story told to me. I don't remember it myself.
What is guaranteed to bring you happiness?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. People, avocados, hummus, dogs, mathematics, although with mathematics, it's an emotional high and a low. So some combination of these things is a good life.
This is my favorite question usually. If you were something other than yourself, I'll leave it quite open for you. What would you be?
I'd be a bat. because as the philosopher Thomas Nagel says, we cannot know what it's like to be a bat. But I would know what it's like to be a bat if I was a bat.
Inside knowledge. Okay, thank you.
What scientific fact that is widely understood still blows your mind?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. There's much in mathematics I could say, although maybe this isn't widely understood. So I had a friend I was speaking with who was questioning if the Earth was round, and he, he was just making this like simple argument, like, wouldn't we fall down? And it's like, what's holding it up? And you try to explain this, but then you realize like actually gravity is a really deep idea, and action at a distance is a really hard thing to wrap our minds around. Like what's facilitating this action at a distance. So Newton struggled with this, but even in contemporary physics, it is a very hard and deep question. Lots of different people have different ways of trying to explain action at a distance. So I would say just gravity, the structure of the universe, why we fall down, right? I think that is actually a profound question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, the time is up for questions, but we appreciate learning a few things about you, also about mathematics. Our topic is God is beauty, and you're going to share with us from the perspective of a scientist. How do you understand some connections between mathematics, beauty, and God that you feel like every person should know at minimum?
Yeah, that's a great question. So perhaps before we bring God into it, we should talk about math and beauty, because I think for many people, they think back to the math experiences and it was far from beautiful, right? It was quite traumatizing, perhaps, at least painful. But if you listen to professional mathematicians talk about mathematics, describe their experience of doing mathematics, they're very quick to use words such as beauty. So I think of Bertrand Russell, the great logician of the 20th century, where he says, mathematics, when it's rightly viewed, possesses not only truth, but supreme beauty. And he's not alone in using descriptions like this. In the 20th century, the British mathematician G.H. Hardy, he wrote a essay called A Mathematician's Apology. This was his case for doing mathematics. And he was intentional not to make a case to say, mathematics, you should learn this because it's useful, right? Learn mathematics so you can become an engineer, or learn mathematics so you can become, a physicist, or whatever it may be. His point was, no, mathematics is interesting to study it because it's useless. He's intentionally emphasizing the uselessness of it, but because it's beautiful. So he's trying to emphasize this pure mathematics that won't get corrupted by being put into some weapon of war or whatever it might be. Yet nevertheless, the mathematics is beautiful in its own right. And so there was a deep tradition of mathematics, of people being drawn to mathematics, not because of just its practical utility, but because it's beautiful. And in this essay, G.H. Hardy makes a metaphor, an analogy. He says, imagine being taught art and never being allowed to see the great paintings, right? Just being taught the brushstrokes, right? And or being taught music and never listening to any of the great symphonies, right? Only learning the rules for how to, write music. And he says, this is how we do math education, right? You never see the great beauty of mathematics. All you do is you learn the rules, and it's like, yeah, that's important, but we miss out on exposing students to the beauty of the field. So I would be super interested in hearing just from some of the rest of you, like, have you seen math as beautiful? Or just hearing that, is that just something where you're like, no, going to the, to math classes like going to the dentist, right?
Well, honestly, go ahead, Ingrid.
Sorry. Growing up, I had a nice relationship up until third grade. And then when it got harder, I didn't see the beauty in it anymore. But once you hit nursing school, you see that it's very useful and practical. But again, you have to work at it sometimes to see, the beauty in the numbers and why they are helpful in everyday life.
I was just going to add, I guess where I saw the beauty as a child was maybe in playing. There's all these children's games often are around numbers and shapes and all of that. And I did like that. In college,
Mhm.
usually I was just with that. But I guess I do wonder, is it possible that, does that depend, does a human's ability to see the beauty in math, do you think that depends a lot on education, or do you think there may be also brain differences where some people really cannot maybe focus, for lack of a better word, in a way that allows them to see that despite of education? Or like how, yeah, what factors influence how we see beauty or not in math?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been talking about mathematical beauty, and you might think this is just something that's reserved to like the elite or something, like just reserved to those who maybe were given the gift as a kid, or maybe who had the opportunity to go on and pursue much mathematics education. But I don't think that's the case. So I think actually in many ways, mathematical beauty is something that's present and has a popular appeal to people broadly. And I think the evidence I would point to this is Islamic art. So in the West, particularly like in Christian churches and cathedrals, if we want to make a great cathedral, we often decorate these with stained glass figures of be it the prophets or the apostles or other significant people, various images of life of Christ, right? But in Islamic ornaments, when you're trying to decorate, say, a mosque or a shrine of some kind, it's not allowed to use images of significant figures in Islamic history, right? We're not going to create an image of the Prophet Muhammad or anything like this, because the idea is we want to prevent any kind of idolatry, any kind of thinking too highly of the person. So what do the great Islamic artists use instead? And the answer is historically it's been geometry. So I have one picture I want to share with you guys, and maybe this will just begin to make the point. So here you can see on the left, we have this shrine dating from the 15th century and Iran. And you look at the way it's decorated, and you see moving from the top to the bottom, there's this elaborate geometric pattern, right? And as you begin looking at it, you can see these various star formations. At the top, there are stars that have, if you count, they have 5 corners to them. As you move down, there are stars that have 7. As you move further down, they'll have 9, and then I think it goes 12, 11, 10, 9. So different numbers, and they're put together in this really elaborate geometric formulation. Or on the right is just another example, is lots of these of different elaborate tilings, or there's also tessellations we can look at. So you often have these tessellations that extend forever, repeating patterns that will feature inside of Islamic art. And I think the fact that they're doing this is like, how do we decorate a place without pictures of people, without pictures of any creative thing, while relying upon geometry, right? Start saying something like, wow, there's going to be a broad appreciation of this. People are going to see this as beautiful. But maybe then we also begin thinking, okay, maybe for these individuals decorating and those who are worshiping in these centers, there is some connection in the mind between mathematics, beauty, and the divine, right?
I can maybe share some of my experience with mathematics. Like I was a person who liked mathematics in school, and I think you asked a question earlier about like whether we've seen mathematics as beautiful, and I found it fascinating in several ways. Like first realizing that some, like mathematics is a very cerebral field. Like you use rational thinking, and but then you have situations where people who have figured out certain mathematical concepts, totally unrelated to like studying nature or anything, but then you figure out that these concepts are found in nature, and like what you've figured out in your head connects to something that's real out there. And then, but then also conversely, I do origami as a hobby, and part of that is folding tessellations, like geometric patterns. And there's this this guy in origami who's also like explored the mathematical concepts within origami that like I've done that as an art form, but there's mathematics that explain how that works. So like the connection between mathematics and beauty, I see that in both in that hobby and like in how it relates to the real world.
Yeah, so origami is a great example, and there's actually a very rich geometry in origami. If we think of Euclidean geometry, the geometry developed by the Greeks, this is a geometry that was based on 5 axioms, and these were just ways that allowed you to draw lines and circles. So if you had a compass, you can draw a circle, a line, and they expressed these through 5 axioms and then built up the mathematical system on top of it. However, one of the great discoveries of the 1800s was that using just Euclidean geometry, there are some things you can't do that geometers really wanted to do. Things such as if you have an angle, being able to trisect an angle. You can bisect, you can cut it in half, but you can't trisect it. And this was a great frustration, where it was many people attempted to do it, but we finally proved you couldn't do it with just the axioms of geometry. By way of contrast, origami also can be described with an axiomatic structure, the various moves you can do when folding. And those moves parallel the moves in geometry, but there's an extra move. There's a way you can copy distances in origami that you can't do with just compass and straight edge. And that extra move in origami allows you to do things with origami that you can't do in typical Greek Euclidean geometry. You can trisect angles. What is behind the scenes, what's powering this is essentially in Greek geometry, you can solve quadratic equations, things like x squared plus 5x plus 1. But with origami, you can solve cubic equations. And so it's a more powerful kind of mathematics feeling it. And so it's like, okay, there's some really rich mathematics here. I'm dropping words from high school that traumatized you, right? Like quadratic and cubic. But I think you just like, but there's part of just the pleasure of doing it, right? It's like there's a pleasure of doing it. And yet behind that, there's some rich mathematics you can dive into. But you can also just experience it on that surface level.
Yeah. And there's this guy named Robert Lang. He's also applied some of the geometric aspects of origami to like satellites and like folding structures in as small space as possible. So like you have mathematical concepts there that are used in a very practical way in within science. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is hitting a tension though, where you would have people like Harding who are saying, that it being useful, that's not why it's important. That's not why it's interesting, right? Like forget about it. Whereas you would have others, people like Wigner, who would point to the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences and say there's something profound here, that problems we're doing just out of intellectual curiosity, just out of interest, then come out to be exactly the kinds of things we need to describe the universe, to do modern sciences. And so you have both views represented in mathematics, some who really marvel at the usefulness, and others who almost think that the usefulness of it taints it in some way, that this is supposed to be something that we're doing just for fun, just for the exploration of ideas. And when you start applying it to the world, something is lost. And both views are very much represented in mathematics.
But I think actually that's one beautiful part of mathematics that I became aware a little bit too late. I think I wish I would have found mathematics earlier quite interesting, but it appeared to me being in an engineering course, there you have to deal a little bit with the higher mathematics, and I just found out it came to me that it is actually quite beautiful. It's quite creative. There is a beauty in the mathematics to describe it. It's a different way of perceiving the world, I would say. There are ways we communicate in words, emotions, but then there's also mathematics, which describe a very beautiful pattern of the universe. And it, I wouldn't even just say like it dulls it, but it is a way of declaring its gloriousness from the way the atoms work, but also the way, for example, some patterns. There is this wonderful video of that boxfish, and he tries to, in order to be attractive, he makes this wonderful geometrical pattern in the sand, and it just looks amazing. And mathematics can be used to describe that. It is for us a description, but it's a different language. And I find, also having looking at it in everyday life, when you have the golden ratio, you have when you look at your photos, there are these lines which go horizontally and vertically, so you have the right proportions in your image. So I find, would you agree that mathematics is it's also another layer to communicate the beauty of the universe?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. So you have you pointed to various ratios or symmetries that we find very attractive, right? And as soon as you start talking about ratios or symmetries or any of those things, we can give a mathematical description of those things, right? And so fundamentally, it's like, what is beautiful? And you might, as we're trying to describe beauty, it's, well, there's some kind of symmetry or an anti-symmetry. There's some kind of relationship here, or some kind of complexity. And all of those things have underneath it a mathematical description. But I think what's powerful about mathematics is that it's an abstract discipline. And so you find this symmetry represented in one particular instance in the formulation of a galaxy or whatever it might be, in some flower configuration. And then you say, well, what is that configuration? What is that symmetry? We can abstract it away, and then we can start playing with the ideas as ideas, right? And we can say, okay, now we can talk about what is the structure of those symmetries. And there's whole fields of math, group theory, and other areas of mathematics to study the mathematics of symmetries. Maybe I'll give an example of this. So I showed a second ago this tessellation in Islamic art. So this inspired the contemporary artist, the 20th century artist, M.C. Escher. So probably many of you have seen his paintings in some form. Let me go ahead and show you just an example of one of them. So here are some tessellations by M.C. Escher, which I just mean it's some repeating pattern that extends infinitely far to the left and to the right, whichever direction you want to go. But it extends infinitely far in slightly different ways. The image on the left, it just kind of repeats itself over and over and over again. And this is his painting called Knights on Horses, where you have this knight figure repeating, and then also in the white space you have an alternative figure repeating in the opposite direction. But then if you look at the image to the right, you have this weird configuration of lizards and fish. I think that's a bat creature. So there's my bat that I want to be, right? And that also repeats, but in a different kind of way. And so you can look at these and be like, oh, this is something that pulls you in. You kind of maybe helps you imagine the infinite extending infinitely far. But what mathematicians do is they would look at these patterns and they would ask, well, how many such kinds of patterns can there be? What are the symmetries here? And one of the great results of mathematicians have discovered is that there are exactly 17 of these. If you look at the kind of symmetry that can be represented in a tessellation, there are 17. And any tessellation will represent one of those 17 different symmetries. And you hear that and you're like, why 17? Right? But any repeating pattern on a wall, decorating the wall of a mosque or decorating whatever it might be, you can look at it. If you see a brick pattern that repeats, you can look. There's a list of 17 possible symmetries. It's one of those symmetries. And so we can just go around the world and see in all these different settings instances of this much more general theory we've been able to build up and understand.
So I think, Erica, do you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
Oh, just a short follow-up. Like, as you see, like they discovered, like math opens up some questions to put, for example, around the shapes. What is there? And I think you described very beautifully how math opens up the avenues to ask different questions towards God as well. I find. Is it? Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's maybe a couple of ways one can come at this. But one is one might wonder, like, why do we take delight in these kinds of things, right? Why do we enjoy patterns and beauty and symmetry and thinking about these things? and then ask, like, what is this telling us about being human, right? But I think there's also definitely a case where we see that these same kinds of ideas that we like just playing around with, what Alina was mentioning earlier, just playing around with ideas, that we develop ideas from doing that. And then when we go out and we study the universe, we discover that those are the very ideas that seem to be reflected in creation, right? The deep structure of the universe is described with these kinds of mathematics we develop from just playing around. So there was a theoretical physicist in the last century, Paul Dirac. He made a lot of contributions to our understanding of the subatomic, right? And he had a wonderful a description of this. So first he argues that if you're trying to come up with some kind of description for the universe, he says, make sure you pick one where the mathematics is beautiful. He puts it this way. He says, a theory with mathematical beauty is more likely to be correct than an ugly one that fits some experimental data. So even if the ugly theory seems to be more, in line with the data, if the mathematics is ugly, it's not going to be true at the end of the day. At the end of the day, the one that's mathematically beautiful will be true. And then he postulates a reason why. He says, God is a mathematician of a very high order. And he used very advanced mathematics in constructing the universe. He's finding that theological language is the best way for him to describe why is it the case that when we go out and we study the universe, we find this deep order that consistently gets explained with some really beautiful mathematics.
And
Yeah, I think
sorry, just a small follow-up. And he said that like that was based on his experience, or was that him claiming that was the case? Like that was based on like, okay, what we found so far is that usually it fits with.
Yeah, this is him reflecting on the development of modern physics and him pointing out. So for instance, Wigner made a very similar point. When Newton came up with his laws of motion, and just even things like his law of gravity, right? Very simple mathematical law. Just gravity is inversely proportional to the distance between the square of the distance between objects, and proportional to their masses. What you have is, at the time, it was like 94% accurate with the data he had, something like that, something in the 90s, right? And you might think that like he gave a very mathematically simple, elegant explanation, and it was pretty accurate. But you might think as you got more data, you would need to like fudge it around and make it messy and kind of an uglier explanation. But actually the opposite happened. As we got more data, we're like, oh no, this actually is the right explanation. And as the data came in, it came and confirmed the nice mathematical explanation. Ultimately, that gave way to Einstein's description of the universe. But again, very beautiful, elegant, non-Euclidean description of the geometry of the universe.
I think just for myself to follow up on Eric's question, because he went in the direction that I wanted to go also. So thank you for that, Eric. But before that, maybe an articulation of what I feel like we've been sharing so far, right? So what I understand so far from the discussion is that mathematics, you're suggesting it is beautiful, but also what we see is that that art always includes math, right? I think that's a known fact, but we don't highlight it as much. But not only art always includes art, but all reality is permeated by mathematics. Mathematics is, I don't know if I can call it a dimension of reality, but definitely a creative force that in a very complex way allows for reality to exist in the way it is, including art, but not limited to art. So mathematics really permeates all reality. And that's a key word for me there, reality, because that's kind of the topic of my general studies. But now if we bring God into the discussion again, right? Oh, and one more thing. I like the fact that I think you mentioned a comment earlier that when you make mathematics useful, some people see it as being tainted, but I see it differently. I see it more as a humble form of creativity, I guess. I don't know what mathematics really is, to be honest. A humble thing that allows other things to be created. So I see it as a bit more in the background, as a creative force, for lack of a better word. but it's something that is necessary that allows other things to exist, that then they shine in their own right, so to speak. And it remains, because right, when we see art, we don't think of the beauty behind it. We just see the surface. So I kind of like that aspect of supportive element there, and of humility, if I can ascribe that to an abstract thing. But now going back to God, so mathematics permeates all reality, and reality is created by God. All reality is created by God, and God is part of reality, but He is also above it in a sense, because He's a source of everything. What kind of connections have you made, or can you make, about God as creator, sustainer of reality, and as a standard of beauty, so to speak, in reference to mathematics?
Yeah, this is a great question. So your claim that like all reality is in some way mathematical, some people have taken that very, very far. So there's a contemporary physicist, Max Tegmark at MIT, who actually argues that the universe is a mathematical structure. The universe is a mathematical object. That just like how one is a mathematical object, or a triangle is a mathematical object, so is the universe. This is a radical claim, and I am not suggesting it in the least. But I think the fact that there are credible people who suggest this just shows the extent to which there is something deep and mysterious going on here, right? Like something to be described, that when we go out, we're able to describe the universe so well with mathematics. We're able to build a particle accelerator. We can make predictions. We can find new particles. We can go out and predict the existence of gravitational waves. And sure enough, then we can detect them with our very, very fancy experiments, right? Like the fact that we can do this has led some people to say, well, maybe the universe is itself just a mathematical object. And I don't want to go that direction. But I do think it is saying something. So Paul Dirac and others had used this language of God being a mathematician. I think there's something to that. Although I don't want to reduce mathematics to simply a empirical science, that when we do mathematics, we're merely discovering this universe. Because I think for many, the joy of mathematics is it gives us some kind of freedom where we're not constrained to this universe. We can imagine other universes. We can imagine totally other ways of being and existing, totally other dimensions, right? And so it's like, well, then what exactly is mathematics doing? And well, maybe let me just paint some pictures for you, right? Or let let Escher paint some pictures for you to make this really concrete one more time. So let me show you some pictures of Escher trying to open up some other realities that mathematics can open up to us, and then maybe we can begin asking, how does this relate to the divine? So here's one more. I just love these pictures. Here are a few more images of Escher. And again, on the right, you have a tessellation happening, but now instead of happening on a flat surface, it's happening on a sphere. And so, you know, this is Escher becoming fascinated with, let's just not just think about Euclidean geometry on a flat plane. Let's think about spheres. And we're like, okay, that's good, that's great. This is him painting himself reflected in a sphere. This is now us moving into spherical geometry. And you might think, well, spherical geometry, that's still very much, you know, part of reality. We live on a sphere. The Earth is approximately a sphere. But why stop with spheres? So there are other kinds of geometries you can imagine too. And here he draws these tessellations. But it's in this disk, and as you extend to the end, things are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. What this actually is this is called a hyperbolic geometry. This is a disk model that comes from the mathematician Poincaré. So Escher was an artist, but he says that he felt more at home with mathematicians than with artists, even though he wasn't trained in mathematics. He had a good friend, Coxeter, who was a geometer, and they often would correspond, and he was being inspired by some of Coxeter's geometry and ideas from Coxeter in order to do his mathematics. But here he's imagining a totally different kind of universe where, as you approach the end of a circle, things seem to shrink, and yet you never quite get there. It's like as you're walking towards the end, you're getting smaller and smaller, and so your path becomes, you're never quite able to get there. There's a whole mathematics we can describe of this non-Euclidean geometry. Or there are other kinds of worlds we can imagine too. He has here this Mobius band, which is you trace an ant along, and the ant begins on the top, but as he keeps walking, he ends up on the bottom, and so it's this one-sided shape. It's a universe where there is no up and there is no down, because you began with what's up and you end up with on the down, right? So there's no ability to orient yourself. And I think for many, mathematics is so exciting because it liberates us from one particular universe, right? And says, let's just imagine the creative possibilities. And you might think, well, this is somehow doing like violence to God as creator. But what did God do when he created? Did he not imagine endless possibilities and then choose which one are we going to instantiate in this creation? And might not then mathematics be giving us more of an insight to the mind of God, of what God could have created, or perhaps other universes he has created or will create, right? Perhaps it's expanding our notion of how we think of God as creator.
I have a question for you regarding faith, because there are many who, as they grow older, they begin to question, God, and faith is really big in understanding who God is and what our religion is about, each respective religion. So having faith in mathematics is similar to having faith in religion. It is to believe in something intangible, which yet is tangible in the mind of believers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So maybe I would think of a few of the great mathematicians who've embodied this. And I think one of my favorite is the mathematician Euler. This is the Swiss mathematician. And he's not alone. You look at the history of mathematics, you have many men and women who are just great mathematicians, great people of faith. And for them, these things seem to fit really well together. But Euler lived at a time in the 1800s when you had this 1700s, 18th century, where you had this free thinking movement arising out of France. And he was very critical of the free thinkers. He called them so-called free thinkers because he didn't think that they were actually so free thinkers was like an atheistic movement coming out of France. It was very critical of mathematics, very critical of scripture. And one of the common critiques that was being offered was just contradictions in scripture. And Euler gave a response to this. He wrote a pamphlet called A Defense of the Revelation, or the full title is much longer than that. Back in the 1700s, there's long titles, but A Defense of the Revelation. I think it was A Defense of the Revelation against the supposed contradictions of so-called free thinkers, or something like this. And in it, he makes an observation. He says, when I'm doing mathematics, I often come across what appears to be a contradiction, right? Maybe you have some experience of doing this in mathematics yourself. It's like you're doing it, it doesn't work out. Like something seems to be off, right? And you can imagine someone who's devoted their life to being doing mathematics, advancing the field in some really significant ways. They will come up with a lot of these seemingly, contradictions that seem to, undermine the whole field. And in math, we can't have contradictions, right? If you have a contradiction, the whole system fails. But his observation is when this happens, I don't lose trust in mathematics. I don't lose my confidence in mathematics. Instead, I figure, okay, well, let me keep working on this. I must have made a mistake, or maybe there's something I'm not understanding correctly, and maybe you figure it out in a day or a week or a month, or maybe it takes you a lifetime of wrestling with it, right? And then he says, how much more should we expect Scripture, who deals with topics that are so much more sublime than mathematics, right? He has a higher view of the topics that Scripture covers than what he's doing. He says, if Scripture is revealing truths that are so much more sublime, so much more significant, how much more we expect that we would come into difficulties there? What may appear as a contradiction, but when that happens, you don't sneer and say, okay, let's disregard this. This is just contradictory. You can ignore it. It's no, like be patient with it. Let it work itself out. This might take days, months, years, or a lifetime, right? But I think for him, the act of doing mathematics taught him to be very patient in his faith as well, right? And I think for many of us, especially as we just deal with some of the challenges of secularism, as we're trying to understand faith and how should we relate to it, I think that's a really important lesson.
I wonder if this makes sense to you. I'm just going to run this by you. But so usually when people think beauty, I'm talking about just random, brief, superficial discussion about beauty. They think of the surface, or the thing that is materialized in a way that is beautiful to them. And so they analyze more that surface, so to speak. But if mathematics permeates all reality, and allows for so much variety of beauty to be created, to exist really, then the beauty is really, if I'm correct, if I'm understanding this correctly, the beauty is not so much in the surface, but in the possibility to create such a diverse, such a diversity of surfaces or materialized realities, if you know, if that makes sense. And so I wonder how that changes our perspective on beauty itself. When we understand there's a possibility, does that allow for more grace with each other as human beings in our preferences and tastes? You know, but even something so small as you know, daily things of beauty that we enjoy, or interpersonal relationships or physical attraction. Does seeing it as a possibility as opposed to materialized reality change our interaction with each other? Does that make any sense? This is kind of where I'm right now with the topic.
Yeah, I think I like this idea of mathematics for us. Beauty isn't really what lies on the surface. I mean, I think there is some of the geometric patterns I showed you. It's like, oh, those are pleasing to look at, you know, just on the surface. Yeah. But it's more of like the inviting you in and the thinking about it, and that sense of discovery and unfolding. So there was the 20th century poet, Edna St. Vincent Millay, right? And she has this great poem set called "Euclid Alone Looked on Beauty Bare." So only Euclid, the great Greek mathematician, has seen the naked form of beauty. And I think she might be getting an idea like that it's the depth of it, the let's dig into this thing, let's see what's going. So maybe I can offer an illustration of this. One more a picture or mathematical image for us, but it was actually going to be a bit more than just a mathematical image. So on the left, I have this equation, which you just look at it and you're like, you know, that's just those ugly mathematical equations. What this is it's just giving us a way to a recursive function. You plug in a complex number, you square it, you add some constant, you get out a new complex number, you repeat this process, and then you can ask what happens as you keep repeating this process in the limit. Does it converge to some number? Does it like go off to infinity? But asking that question, running that algorithm, produces a picture. And I'll just take a second to show you that picture. It's this picture here. You may have seen it before. And you look at it, it's like, okay, this is just some big black blob. That's not very interesting, right? On the surface, maybe you think it's whatever. But then as you begin to zoom in, as you begin to go further and further and further into it, this is all generated by just that one simple algorithm, right? And the more you zoom into this, you start seeing, whoa, this doesn't like just bottom out, but instead there's that structure again, the one we started out with. So this is a fractal. This is called the Mandelbrot set. There's self-similarity in it. But you keep zooming in, and there's like more and more depth, more and more complexity. And it turns out you can zoom in forever. There's an infinite zoom you can do. It's not like you zoom in and it usually gets pixelated. It's as you keep zooming in, if you have the computational power to do so, you can see richer and richer complexity. And you can imagine right now, we're just zooming into one little portion of it. And you might think like it's all gonna go red right now, but oh wait, here's more structure. We keep zooming in. You could zoom in somewhere else and you would find different structure. And you just keep going. And there's like this infinite possibility, this infinite progression of what seemed on the surface just be a black blob, right, with some, I guess, spikes on it. You start zooming in, and all generated by just this one algorithm, just that one simple algorithm on the left. You have all of this structure, all of this complexity lying under the surface. And there are videos that do this for hours you can find on the internet. But I think, you know, perhaps as your question was indicating, maybe there's some life lesson here. Maybe there's some application we can try and think about for how we think about or experience beauty, where we tend to look on the surface, whether there's the algorithm or there's a black blob, right? And it's like, wait a second, maybe there's some real depth to this. Maybe in our friendships, in our relationships, in our connections with others, we're used to just being like, that shape's not so profound, or, you know, whatever. But let me dig into this relationship. Let me get to know this person. And perhaps it's also true in our relationships and in our personal lives. There's that infinite depth of beauty as well. And we're not used to looking for that.
I think the reason why I find this very helpful on a personal level, even theological level, if I can put it this way, is in the concept of the standard of beauty. Because, oftentimes when we look for a reference point, again, we look for kind of a surface reference point. But if we understand beauty as possibility and not so much as materialized existence, then we have more freedom. I think it can give us more grace to accept differences, maybe to learn how to value and cherish differences of any kind, from physical beauty to any beauty anywhere, I guess, and also to create it, because to me it's an invitation to create. If beauty is a possibility, then I'm invited into it to make use of it, to create. There's a lot to say there, but I do appreciate this aspect for sure.
I really just like the way you showed the Mandelbrot set, and it just make me think, how about in school when you just have your normal numbers, or you do your addition 1 + 1, and when you think about it, like I remember it was like in 4th grade or so, where you try to explore like, so how many numbers are there, and you see how it's limitless. And then you go into the next grade, you learn, okay, they're actually minus numbers. Oh, and in between numbers there are numbers as well. And then there are the complex numbers, like, so it keeps expanding. Something that the numbers I find portray very well is eternity. Like, this is like the only realm, and despite that there is eternity, there's more to it. And it is easy for us humans to think like, oh yeah, we want to find a simple way to describe God. So like, oh yeah, mathematics, that's good. So we can go from 0 to eternity. So that should do the job. But I think it's the same thing, which is very well described through math. And I love how you describe that there is a life lesson in there, that even if you think, okay, we covered everything, wait, there's more. And yeah, thank you very much for that insight.
Yeah, numbers, there are so many numbers. so it's not just that. Oh, this is probably my favorite mind-blowing fact. This is one that's not well known, but this is incredible. It's not just that numbers go on forever. It's like, yes, we can think about like whatever big number you think is big, it's tiny compared to going on forever, right? But it's not just that. Like, limit your attention to just like a really small like slice of numbers. Like, say, limit our attention to numbers between 0 and 1. And it's like, okay, I think I have a pretty good grasp on numbers between 0 and 1. There's numbers like a half or a tenth. There's the rational numbers in there, the numbers we can represent as fractions, 3/5 or whatever it might be. But it turns out that if you look at like how many of the numbers between 0 and 1 are fractions, things like 3/5 or a half or a fifth, it's virtually none of them. In some precise sense, it's like 0%. It's smaller than it's the vast majority. Nearly every number between there cannot be written as a fraction. So you're like, oh, those must be like those irrational numbers. And you're like, okay, I can describe some of those irrational numbers. Like pi is an irrational number. Pi is not between 0 and 1, but if you subtract 3 and you just take the tail of pi, that's an irrational number that's between 0 and 1. But it gets even more wild, because you think you understand some of the irrational numbers in there. But it turns out, if you take all the numbers that humans have ever described between 0 and 1, and not only that humans have ever described, that we can never describe, that finite creatures can never describe in a finite number of words between 0 and 1, again, it's 0%. Virtually all numbers are indescribable. Virtually all numbers cannot be given a description with a finite number of words. And so it's like the vast majority of numbers, virtually 100% of numbers, can never even be described. Not because they're too big, just because they're too mysterious unto us, right? And so you're like, I think I have some grasp of numbers, and we do understand numbers. We have some good grasp, but enough to let us live our lives and do the things we're going to do. But there's like infinite depth to this, and how much more should that be like our view of God? Right? Like I think I have some grasp of like who God is. And it's like, we do. I think we have enough that we can live our lives and we can seek to live in alignment with his will and all of that. Good. But the moment you start thinking like you get a little bit too proud of your knowledge of God, remember, it's 0%. It's like our knowledge of the numbers. Like, you think you know them, you don't know enough to get it by, but it's virtually nothing. And it'll always be the case after, even if we have 10 trillion years to study numbers, we still know 0% of them, right? And how much more is that true of God? And I think that's just a really like humbling and exciting. And it's like, oh man, I want to spend eternity not just figuring out new numbers, but knowing who God is. And then yet I'll know even after an eternity of seeking to know God, it's still going to be 0%, right?
It takes away the fear of being bored in eternity.
Right.
You know, and it helps you, like, you know, math is sometimes that big monster in school where you like, again, that, because it's we you described it very well, because it's made to use, it's just a workhorse, but we miss the beauty that is in there. But yeah, thank you so much for describing it as something that can motivate us. On the one hand, to be humble, like, okay, yeah, I thought I saw this blob. Okay, that's gone. Let's have a closer look into that. And yeah, it I think looking from that perspective, it is humbling and yet a beautiful, not a demotivating, but a beautiful way to look how mathematics give us a different view of God.
Yeah, I'm reminded of this verse in Job where it talks about the angels at creation and how they're just shouting for joy, right? C.S. Lewis depicts this with them singing, God singing into creation. And I just imagine it's like we'll be getting to understand our world and the geometry that's used in this world and how things work. But it's like, man, if God's a great mathematician and is able to dream up entirely new, strange, bizarre universes, it's like, how awesome will it be in eternity to witness new creation events, right? And the new kinds of geometry being instantiated, or the new kinds of, whoa, it's like those upside down ants or whatever, right? Like, what kind of strange new universe? And I just think it's thrilling. It's like it's opening up to endless new worlds, opening up to endless possibilities. We're not constrained by how things are. Back to Alien's point, it's about the possibility of it, right?
Yeah, I found that idea immensely attractive. Like it excites me. Like with some things, like if you know that it's, oh, we're never going to be finished, and it's like, oh, but like here it's, wow, like there's infinite opportunity for discovering something new and amazing. And like with mathematics, you have with the numbers, and then also within relationships, that like there's an infinity of exploration. And yeah, as someone who has curiosity and exploration as a very strong like personality trait, or like a part of, like, yeah, new exploring new things excites me. So that, yeah, just makes me all the more look forward to eternity.
I would like to maybe draw one more connection between mathematics and theology, for lack of a better word. They already are connected, but to articulate it maybe a bit more, and Anthony, I'm going to ask for your help here. If I understand correctly, so between mathematics and human and divine nature, because we're talking about infinity, and
Good.
infinity is not a static thing, as you know, that would have echoes in Greek philosophy. Infinity is a movement of possible creative possibilities, and if that is how God created the universe to be, including mathematics, which permeates our reality, then that reflects God Himself, right? And God's human nature is temporal, at least somewhat, in some ways temporal, as opposed to timeless, which also reflects human nature, which then, interestingly, connecting our mathematics with emotions, going so far as to making that connection, right? God as temporal being is capable of change and experiencing internal change within the Trinity and outside of the Trinity. That involves emotions, affections, how He relates to us. Do these make sense to you from your perspective as a scientist, and what do you make of it, basically?
Yeah. So let's just talk about emotions and math for a second, because again, I think many people have had some very negative emotions tied to the mathematical training and experience, and that's understandable. I think a lot of learning how to do mathematics, learning emotional resilience, how to hold it, stick it out during the lows so you can experience those highs, right? But there was a study done at University College London where they brought in mathematicians and scanned their brain so connect them with an fMRI machine to scan the neural activity that was taking place as they viewed equations. And there are some equations that mathematicians describe as particularly beautiful. Maybe I'll just show you one really fast. This is the last thing I'll show you, but you guys have to see this.
Sure.
You have to see this. So let me show you one last equation. So this is the equation that mathematicians have consistently described to be beautiful. It's often ranked the most beautiful equation when there are surveys done. And unlike some of the art we saw earlier, if you're not trained in mathematics, it may be a little bit hard to appreciate what's going on here. But you have E, it's a number that comes from the calculus, thinking about limits as things go off to infinity, 2.7, 1828, irrational number. You have I, the imaginary unit. You have pi, we talked about pi sum. You have the unit 1. You have 0, right? You have addition taking place. You have multiplication taking place, you have an exponent. And so it's like the 5 most important numbers in mathematics, the 3 most important operations, addition, multiplication, and exponent. And for some reason, all of these values, which come from very different areas of mathematics, pi is geometry, right? E is analysis, I comes from trying to solve algebraic equations. It's all very different areas of mathematics. They all get married together in this one equation. And so mathematicians are just like, this was a very surprising, this was a discovery of Euler, by the way. It was a very surprising discovery. It's a very elegant equation. It's very simple. It brings together these very disparate areas of mathematics into a single equation with simplicity, right? And it's like, whoa, how is this taking place? So when viewing that equation, these researchers found that the prefrontal cortex, the emotional center of mathematicians' brains lit up. The exact same region that lit up when people listen to a great piece of music or when they see a great painting, right? And so mathematicians have emotional reactions. And the same kind of reaction we all have when seeing just the symmetry, the patterns. But when you're trained in the discipline and you're trained to understand what the symbolic notation means, you light up with that same kind of emotional reaction. And so without a doubt, I think this is saying, we often think of mathematics as being very cold, very rational in a way that's opposed to emotion. But that is not the experience of mathematicians. We see an integration of the emotion with the rational, with the intellectual. To the question of God creating, I think in many ways just the practice of doing mathematics is a very strong apologetic. It's why are humans the kinds of creatures that can do mathematics? And it's, well, if I'm simply taking a naturalistic perspective, I think it's very hard to understand this conversation we've been having today, to appreciate it. But if we are made in the divine likeness, if there's a divine mind that created the universe and we're made in that likeness so that we too can seek to understand the universe, it makes sense why we can do these kinds of creative activities. It makes sense why we can describe the world around us. And perhaps it even makes sense why beauty and truth track together. Maybe that's the big discovery of mathematics. If you put in a nutshell, mathematics is teaching us that beauty and truth, they go hand in hand. It's not like there's the beautiful over here and there's the true over here, but no, these things actually, they track together. And this is like Paul Drac was saying earlier, if you're going to pick your model of the universe, pick the beautiful one, because the beautiful one is more likely to be the true one. And so I think that's saying something very profound about God created the universe in a way to be beautiful. And this is even said in Genesis. He made the trees to be admired, right? That God made the universe. And so it's, I think this is saying something that God embodies both truth and beauty, and we should expect in our mathematics for these things to track together, and perhaps also in our theology.
Beautiful. That's wonderful. We've gleaned a lot from our conversation, and I'm curious about the takeaways. If there's anything else that we'd like to bring up, feel free to. But I would really love to see how this comes together into a summary here at the end. So either takeaways or additional questions if you have at this point. And you don't have to limit yourself to one.
I'm trying to come up, like, because having a look at all this, mathematics is not just a mean to, like, just not a workhorse which makes our phones and our technology work, but it is also a way to read and see the world in a different light, which maybe you can't see with eyes, maybe you can't listen to it, or maybe you can't feel it with your hands. However, this world that you can perceive through mathematics, through this abstract thing, like, you might read it as numbers, but there is an emotion to that. And I find, although we learn it with a different emotion, I find this is an emotion which also can lead you to God, and which declares his supreme glory above the universe. And I think that is a wonderful takeaway from today, where we can see how something that we might have picked up with a different intention shows us eventually that, it gives us hints to a beautiful creator which had good taste in mind, who doesn't just reveal himself through what can be seen and what can be felt, like what appears to what we can grab with our hands, but something that hits our emotions as well as our intellect. So yeah, really, really, really something that I haven't never considered math about, and I'm really thankful for today's conversation. Thanks a lot, Anthony.
I'll say that I definitely won't be underestimating math again. It's not basic, it's very complex, but I think today brought a different perspective in math that I've never seen before, and I'm excited to explore it more and to see more of God's beauty in it.
I think for me, I feel like some of the things we covered in this conversation gave me a greater admiration and appreciation for God. Like, when you see the complex beauty of mathematics, you gain an increased respect for, like, wow, God is, like, he is very, what would be a right word? Like, not intelligent would not be enough. It, like, is just huge. And like, he's created with all this complex beauty that we can explore for an eternity and still not exhaust the beauty and the discoveries in there. And yeah, and it also made me excited about eternity to continue exploration.
I think that's all really wonderfully said. I especially like Eric's comment about mathematics isn't just a workhorse, right? Of course, mathematics is extremely useful, as you pointed out, to so many of our modern technologies. And some of the reason people like Harding and others want to push back against that is because they had seen the way mathematics was utilized in warfare. And so many mathematicians looking at things like the atomic bomb and other kinds of new technologies that have developed because of mathematics were quite horrified and sometimes want to retreat. But we can't retreat. We have a responsibility to use our mathematics in ethical ways to make human lives better, to help people flourish in this world. But I think the cool thing about mathematics is while we can improve this world, seek to understand it better, it's also opening up new worlds, right? It's opening up the possibility of something totally else could be out there, and perhaps also opening up our hearts to eternity. And so I think, there's something God has done in creating us with the minds that we have, the ability to be curious and imagine. And I like to say that my blackboards are windows into eternity, right? So in a similar way that when you go and you see a great piece of art, it might transport you into another world, a better world. It might open up in you a desire for eternity. I think mathematics can serve that role as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a very rich discussion. Honestly, I had no idea where we're going with it, and I feel like I've come out with quite a lot. They're hard to articulate because it's a very broad discussion. But I'm going to try also to give you my 5 ideas, which I'm going to try to recreate from these short notes here. Some of them are a bit repeats, maybe with a different ones, but this is what I'm getting from it. One, that there is a risk of idolatry when you make mathematics as anything else the ultimate thing. We've seen that with natural laws, also with scientific revolution, right? So we discover natural laws, and then we think we can discard of God because we understood it. That's to me, that's a misleading thinking, because it doesn't have to be either or. You don't have to choose between the two. So it's the same here. There's the same risk here. The more you understand something, the more you're tempted to make it the ultimate thing or the thing in itself, or the more you see the mystery in it also, same thing. So both understanding and mystery have that risk. Two, I like how you said earlier that beauty and truth go together. Overcoming that Kantian distinction, I think is really important. And our postmodern world has done pretty good at that, but this also highlights it. Three, the interplay, this has been emphasized quite a bit, the interplay between, I love how mathematics shows me that interplay between creative possibility, but also actualized reality. In other words, there's a surface of everything that already exists or is being brought into existence, even with our own human capacities. And then I can enjoy that and I can delight in it without having to analyze everything. But there is also a possibility of analysis of that already actualized reality that allows me then windows, as you kept saying, of creative possibility beyond that. So thinking of mathematics as creative possibility additional to actualized realities, to me, is phenomenal. And I'm going to have more respect for it for sure. I think I shared three. Four would be, yes, again, the connection between God, how infinity in mathematics reflects God's infinity, and that it is not a static point in time, it's not an mover, but it's a temporal God who has eternal time. It's infinite, but it's temporal. So we move through time and we experience change and experience relationships and emotions. And it's fun to see that reflected in mathematics as well. And five, going back to the idea of standard, because really our focus in Life with God is precisely that, trying to find a standard of, and God, looking at God as a standard of. And the most fascinating thing for me from this whole discussion is that thinking of standard not as a possibility. Thinking of standard as a possibility, not as an actuality. And that is a completely new thought for me. Even the concept itself, how do we understand it? How do we conceive of it? And the discussion of mathematics right now leaves me with this question of what is a standard anyway? Is it a static thing or is it a possibility? So Anthony, thank you so much. And also to the group, of course. We do want to take a few more minutes and give you the opportunity to speak also to our viewers and our listeners as a final word, again, on the topic of beauty, mathematics, and God.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think that there is a sense where many people often feel excluded from mathematics, if not because of their own traumatic experiences, just because, for whatever reason, that's something you did back in school and you kind of left it behind. And what I want to say is, even if for you it may not look like diving into equations or understanding, some deep abstraction, I think mathematics is something that we can just all appreciate, right? There's a reason that people decorate their holy places with mathematics. There's a reason that when we go out in nature, we find various symmetries beautiful. And so I just want to encourage people to start trying to see, can I come to life today with a mathematical eye? Right? Can I go and look around the world today and be like, oh, there's some symmetry, there's something going on, and get kind of curious about it, right? When you see something, get curious about it. What is that pattern? What is that structure? What happens if we change it? Can we extend it? And start asking these curiosities. And not only do I think to reflect the conversation today, will that then give you some perhaps deeper insight to the world around you, get you curious, start asking these kinds of questions. But as we've been talking about, it opens up all the possibilities. Right, it opens up to us begin imagining what the world might be like, right? And I think for us that if you have God in your way of thinking, it's like wait a second, like maybe eternity is something to begin to get excited about, right? Maybe there's these other universes of things I can begin to start longing for. And so I think in that way, mathematics can actually increase our love for God, our desire to know God, our desire to spend eternity with Him. And so I just want to encourage you to approach life today, approach life this week with a mathematical eye.
A heartfelt thank you to our special guests and to the student panelists for their thoughtful engagement. On behalf of our sponsor, the Adventist Theological Society, and on behalf of the Life with God team, I would like to also thank our viewers and our listeners for being here. We hope that you have learned some new and helpful insights that will transform you more into the likeness of God and empower you to become a better human being. As you can see, these conversations bring together young adults and scholars who have dedicated their lives to advancing our understanding of God, of the Bible, and of the complex human personhood. It is a unique opportunity for you to get to know these committed servant leaders and learn from them as they interact with students from around the world. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so with your presence, your comments, your prayers, and by sharing the program. If you're so inclined, you can also extend your financial support by donating to the Adventist Theological Society. To do so, go to www.atsjats.org/resources and find the Donate Now button. Make sure you also subscribe to the Adventist Theological Society YouTube channel, where you will find past and ongoing seasons. Thank you again, and I hope that you will join us next time as well.